Around the world and throughout the nation, we are in a moment of crisis. To date, the COVID-19 virus has infected nearly 2 million people and has taken the lives of tens of thousands worldwide, with the death count growing each day. On every block, in every neighborhood, there is a shared feeling of danger as our lives and livelihoods are threatened, our sense of normalcy is destroyed, and the gravity of what's at stake weighs down on each of us. But what we may not immediately recognize is that crises present us with both grave dangers and big openings for change. The word crisis comes from the Greek word crises, which describes the turning point in a disease, when the sick person could take a turn for the better or for the worse. In moments of crisis, society stands at a crossroads, faced with different possible paths forward and needing to make a decision about which way we go. Now, many of us are probably still thinking, I hope this is over soon so things can go back to normal. But back to normal is not an option. Here's why.
Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies and to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable.
Milton Friedman was a leading force in advancing the corporate agenda that has reshaped our economy and government for the worse over the last 50 years. Friedman was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about crises and the opportunities they create. Corporations and the politicians that serve them understand this very well, and they will use the COVID-19 crisis to reorganize society in their favor. They've done it before, and not so long ago. When the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, we felt grief, fear, and uncertainty. But a set of political and corporate leaders sensed an opportunity to grow their power and move an agenda. Before the dust had even settled, they started telling a story about protecting us from terrorism by vilifying Muslims and immigrants, and reshaped our society by dragging us into war, locking down borders, and seizing broad, unchecked powers to spy on everyday people. Meanwhile, our movement was ill-equipped to beat back these attacks. The result? Tens of thousands of needless deaths, our privacy sold to the highest bidder, and the further militarization of our country, all things which brought immense profits to a bunch of corporations at our expense. Now, let's look at another crisis, the 2008 financial crash, and how things played out a little different there. When Wall Street crashed our economy, stripping millions of homes, jobs, and pensions, they immediately sought to take advantage of the crisis they created by lobbying for a huge taxpayer-funded bailout. This time, we were more prepared to step into that opening and fight back, but we still didn't have the power we needed to rebuild an economy that worked for all of us in the wake of the financial crisis. So they got their bailout. But we kept working, organizing loads of new people and helping them make meaning of the pain and loss they were experiencing, and putting forward big ideas around what a new economy could look like. And as the economic recession wore on, these big ideas took hold in people's hearts and spread like wildfire through the Occupy movement. It took 3 years, but we were able to turn a material crisis, the 2008 crash and recession, into a crisis of legitimacy. In other words, a moral crisis that made everyday people across the country really question the status quo. Folks started to see beyond individual bad actors and see the ways that the whole system had been rigged in the interests of big corporations. And more people started to see the control that big corporations had over both political parties. So, while we didn't win everything we wanted in that moment, that moral crisis paved the way for more big ideas, like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, a homes guarantee, and canceling student debt. And politics in this country hasn't been the same since. So now let's come back to the COVID-19 crisis. We can already see the story that the corporate elite and their purchase politicians are selling to avoid accountability for this crisis and use it to advance their own agenda. But we know the truth. They created the very crisis that they are now seeking to exploit. What would have been a challenge, the spread of a pandemic, has become a full-blown health and economic catastrophe precisely because of the ways that the rich and powerful have dismantled the social safety net, denied care to millions, and driven most Americans into a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. That ain't right. This crisis requires us to face the immediate dangers it presents to our lives. We must do our part to flatten the curve, take care of each other, and reduce harm to our communities. But it's also our responsibility to be strategic and address the danger of what will happen if the culprits of the crisis get to be the only ones presenting solutions to it. There's an old saying that all organizing is reorganizing. The period we are in and that will follow this crisis is the ultimate reorganizing moment and will determine what is possible for decades to come. Everything is up for grabs: beliefs, power, policy, and culture. This is why things won't go back to normal, because forces from every direction are seeking to be agents in that reorganization. So, we have to decide. Will we sit on the sidelines hoping for back to normal? Or will we take this opening and fight like hell to win what we need? Here are 3 things to get us started.
We must use this moment to put forward big, bold demands and make them part of a new common sense. In this moment, it's clear to most of the country that tiny relief checks aren't going to cut it. Millions of people support ideas that would have seemed like a radical agenda just a few weeks ago. Medicare for all, paid time off, housing as a human right, the cancellation of debt, and more. People need these things now, and they're more winnable than ever. Winning on these issues can save lives and keep millions more from falling into poverty. And if we win these things, we'll help normalize policies that the corporate elite have spent decades and billions of dollars trying to undermine.
To win big demands that deliver relief in the here and now, and set us up to win in the long term, we will need many, many more people to join the fight. So this is a moment that calls for organizing. Tens of millions of people, maybe more, are significantly more ready for organizing than they were just weeks ago, as the gross injustices of our systems are laid bare for everyone to see. Millions need support and connection now. This is a moment to bring those folks in and build a bigger we.
To do this, we need to help our families, friends, and neighbors make meaning out of this moment. If we don't help folks make a new meaning, they'll fall back into old narratives centered on shame, fear, and scarcity. One meaning people could take away is that China and Chinese people are at fault for this crisis, a distraction that Trump and the right-wing media are seeking to drive. Or they may blame themselves for not having the resources to weather these difficult times on their own. Instead, we can use this moment to make it clear that we found the villain and it is not each other. We can expose the corporate actors and the right-wing political hacks who turned this challenge into a catastrophe. We can show how the so-called magic hand of the free market is not going to save us. And we can use this as a moment to reclaim the idea that we need a strong and democratic government that serves the common good. If we can shape how people understand this crisis, we can shape the story of what could happen next.
Remember, crisis means we are at a turning point. We can come out of this crisis more whole and healthy as a people, or we could take a turn for the worse. It all depends on how powerfully we respond in this moment. Take action at peoplesaction.org/crisis.